And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Let me tell you a little bit about Howard Friedman, Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the University of California. For 3 decades, he has studied personality predictors of longevity, developing a scientific understanding of the disease-prone personality and the self-healing personality. His latest book that he co-wrote with Leslie Martin is called The Longevity Project. Here's Dr. Howard Friedman on Coast to Coast, first-time guest. Howard, how are you?
I'm good. Glad to be with you.
I am fascinated by this. When I first saw a news story break on this about a month or so ago, I called my producers up and I said, we've got to get Howard on the program. This is remarkable stuff. An 80-year decade, 88 decades, but 80 years of a study. It's amazing.
Certainly is, and it's a good thing that I didn't have to do all 80 years.
No, that would, let's see, you'd be about 120 right about now.
Then I could really write a book about the Longevity Project, right?
How did you get involved with this?
Well, about 25 years ago, I was really growing frustrated with the current state of research about health and longevity. Everybody knows that some people are more prone to disease and then they die younger ages. Other people thrive or they recover from their illnesses. And there were, all kinds of explanations were being offered. Is it anxiety? Is it nerve-wracking careers? Disintegrating social group? Pessimism? All kinds of things were being proposed, type A behavior. But nobody really knew the answer. Many of the studies were flawed because they didn't have the right people to compare to. They just had certain people who seemed to live long, but they didn't know, what were they like when they were younger. So we started looking around to say, how could we really find out the important things in life, not just you get more likely to catch a cold when you're stressed, but who gets cancer and who gets heart disease and who lives long and who dies young. We all know that some of it's biological genes, but genes really only account for about a third of the variation in how long people live. So I started looking around for an archival data set that we could adapt and bring and make a longevity study, and that's when we came across the Terman data.
Tell me about Louis Terman. Who was he?
Well, he was a very interesting guy. He was first he was interested in intelligence, and so he developed this Stanford Binet intelligence test, which most people have heard about. It's an IQ test. And he was also interested in figuring out, do young, bright children grow up to be kind of weird and nerdy, or do they grow up to be intellectual leaders that society should value? And the stereotype at the time was, those bright kids, they're never going to amount to much. They're smart, but they're too weird. So he said, well, I'm going to follow them. So he recruited over 1,500 boys and girls starting in 1921, and he started following them up. And, by the time they were 1940, he had a lot of information about them. He knew their personalities from their parents rated them, their teachers rated them. He interviewed them. He had doctors examine them. He tracked them. He saw how they did in school, when they got married, and Terman died in about 1956. The study continued ever since. So Terman was really a kind of a pack rat. You wouldn't believe the amount of information he collected on all these people. When we look over,
and that was before computers.
Well, that's the interesting thing. It's mostly is still on questionnaires and in file cabinets.
Oh my God!
So some of it's been put into computers, but we still have to go back to the original files a lot of times and improve the data, make it usable in modern scientific means. But Terman, because he was so meticulous, we have basically about over 10 million pieces of data from this archive.
I would guess that most of these kids from 1921 have passed on since, haven't they?
Yeah, although a lot of them lived till fairly recently. We estimate that there are only about 24 who are still alive, maybe a few more. They've been dying, pretty rapid pace in the last few years, because the ones who are still alive would be in their 90s or over 100. But what we had to do was go and track down their death certificates from all around the country, find out where they died, and then get the death certificate and find out what they died from and how long they lived.
I was, they have some of those internet classmate websites, and maybe about a year ago I was on one of them just kind of playing around. I graduated in 1968 from a school in Dearborn, Michigan, and from a high school there. And so, I just kind of wanted to check in on some of my old chums and classmates.
Right.
And it's remarkable, Howard, how many people, even from that time period, have died. And it's kind of sad because, you remember them as you did when you last saw them. They were all 17, 18 years old. And then you look and you see, so-and-so passed away in Vietnam. So-and-so died of a car crash. And it's really jarring. You know that?
Well, I think what would be really interesting is if you actually thought back about what they were like even then, because one of the really intriguing things in the longevity project was that it's not random who lives long and who dies young. Sometimes accidents happen and nobody's to blame, but we found a lot of times people you could predict, and that's what a lot of the book is about. So if you think back to your high school classmates and then look at who's died and who's still alive, I'll bet you'll see some patterns there. You'll say,
yeah,
this doesn't surprise me so much that this group of people have passed away.
Now, you got involved in this for 20 years. That's pretty long, too. Was there ever a point in this study that you wanted to cut it short and just say, hey, I got enough data. I'm going to start making some conclusions here?
Yeah, when the grant funding agencies say, well, we're not giving you any more money, that's a good time to start saying,
it's time to end the project, right?
Yeah, we kept saying we were going to stop, and when we started out, we thought we would spend about 6 months to a year looking at this, and the deeper we got, the more interesting it got, and we still have some of our undergraduate students. They come up and they go, a 20-year study, you guys should get a life, stop this already, but more and more interesting questions keep popping up, and that's why we decided to write the book, The Longevity Project, because we wanted to pull together the 20 years of findings that we've been collecting.
Plus the 60 from before. I mean, an 80-year project. It's almost like a time capsule, isn't it?
It really is. You go back and you see some of the games they were playing and some of the kinds of books they were reading. It is really interesting to see, but in many ways, the kinds of things that these people were doing are similar to the kinds of things that people are doing today. So you might think, well, that's not going to be relevant to my health and my long life. But in fact, it turns out it really is, because just like the children in the 1920s, some of them were real extroverted and some were introverted. Today, some people are shy and some people are extroverted. And, in those days, some of the parents got divorced, and today sometimes the parents get divorced, and on and on. So there's really a lot of parallels between how they lived then and how they lived and how people live today.
Well, and we're going to talk about all those personality traits and how they've affected people and their longevity. In 1921, when this started, how old were the kids? 5 years old, 10 years old?
Well, on average, they were 10 years old, but some of them were young, as young as about 4 or 5, and some of them were teenagers. So Terman was trying to just grab as many bright kids as he could and put them in the study. So once he found one who met his criteria, he entered them in the study. But they were born on average in 1910.
Were they primarily from a specific region of the country?
Yeah, the study was done in California, and the students were mostly recruited from the Los Angeles areas and San Francisco.
Okay. Now, how does personality, even in this childhood era, contribute to long life?
Well, we always think that certain things are going to be healthy and other things are going to be unhealthy. You always hear, cheer up, be optimistic, take it easy. Is that the key to long life? And so we decided to look into different aspects of personality. Personality is pretty stable across time. If you go back and you see some of your friends from high school, it's not so surprised that the most outgoing ones became the salespeople and the good talkers. Mm-hmm. But people do change. Some people, were really shy, and then they became, much more extroverted and outgoing. So it's a good variable kind of to use because it has some stability. So it tells you something across the years, but then again, some people do change. So we went back and looked at in the 1920s. Dr. Terman had the parents and the teachers of the children rate them on all kinds of dimensions, and he was very thorough in his, scale after scale and rating after rating. And we took those ratings and we turned them into modern personality scales by doing some studies on modern participants. So we have a good measure of what their personalities were like in the 1920s. And then we asked, well, the first question is, some of them live longer than others, and so it was really exciting, you can imagine, because we were wondering if anything from the 1920s could predict how long they would live decades later. And so
right.
the really good news was that a lot of things did, and so then that really encouraged us to keep going with this study.
But personality was just one of the many factors you looked at to determine one's longevity, right?
Right. We also looked at their family life, their own careers later, how they approach things, and so on. So you want me to go on and tell you a little bit more about the personality findings?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
But you're with us for 3 hours. You know that. Did I tell you that?
Okay. Well, sounds like you have a lot of questions.
I hope they told you that.
They told me that. I have 20 years of interesting little findings we can talk about.
Good. Super. Back to personality.
Okay. So it turned out that when we looked at all the data and all the different individual differences, it really wasn't the cheery children who lived longest. They did not really thrive, and it wasn't the ones who took it easy. In fact, the really cheery kids were more likely to die at a younger age on average. And then we looked at, well, did extroversion, being really outgoing, matter, or was it the more introverted, shy kids who lived longer? And it turned out that didn't matter so much either, because if you were really extroverted, you tended to get yourself in trouble a lot of times. So if you hung out with the wrong group, you'd pick up a lot of unhealthy behaviors. So it was good in some respects and bad in other respects. So on average, it was a wash. But the variable that really predicted the personality trait that was really most relevant was what we call conscientiousness. So these are the children who were prudent, and they were especially persistent, and they would plan their lives. They were more focused. And